Torak was known across the galaxy as the toughest warrior to ever live. His name struck fear into the hearts of enemies, and even the strongest armies hesitated to face him. His reputation was built on years of fighting in battles that few survived. With his enormous strength, quick reflexes, and a mind that could outthink even the most skilled tacticians, Torak had never been defeated. There were stories about him, told in hushed tones across countless planets. Some said he could kill an entire battalion with just his bare hands. Others claimed he could survive on any hostile world, no matter the conditions. His skills were unmatched, and he had earned his title as the galaxy's greatest warrior. But despite his fearsome reputation, Torak was tired. Tired of the endless fighting, the constant wars, and the never-ending battles for control. He had fought for kings, generals, and emperors, but none of it had brought him peace. There was always another war, another battle to win, but no real satisfaction in it. Deep down, Torak longed for something more, something different from the endless cycle of violence and conflict. It was during one of these quiet moments, when Torak was sitting alone on his ship, gazing out into the vastness of space, that he received a strange communication. The message came from Earth, a planet he had heard of but never visited. The Earth's Marine Corps, one of the most respected military forces in the universe, had heard of his incredible abilities and wanted him to come to their home planet. They wanted him to train with them, to learn from them, and in turn, to teach them. The message was brief but direct. We are the best. We want to see if you are better. At first, Torak was skeptical. He had fought warriors from every corner of the galaxy, and he knew that most races couldn't match his strength or skill. But there was something about the challenge that intrigued him. What could a group of humans, who were not known for their physical might, teach him? What could they offer that he hadn't already learned in his years of battle? Still, the curiosity burned inside him, and he knew that this would be a test unlike any other. After a few days of contemplation, Torak decided to accept the challenge. He packed his gear, boarded his ship, and set a course for Earth. As he traveled through the vastness of space, he wondered what awaited him on this strange planet. He had no idea that this decision would lead to a series of events that would completely change the way he viewed strength and combat. When Torak arrived on Earth, he was met by a group of Marines. They were not tall, muscular beings like the warriors he was used to, but ordinary humans dressed in military uniforms. They greeted him with respect, but there was no awe in their eyes, no fear. They simply treated him as another soldier, and Torak found this both puzzling and intriguing. On other worlds, warriors bowed before him. But here, there was only a professional handshake. The leader of the group, a tall man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, introduced himself as Captain Mason. "Welcome to Earth, Torak," Captain Mason said, his voice steady and commanding. "We've heard a lot about you, but you're here to learn, just like everyone else. We don't care about your reputation. We care about your ability to adapt and work as part of a team. You're not the leader here. You're just another Marine." Torak was taken aback. He had never been treated like this before. But there was something in Captain Mason's eyes that told him this man wasn't just talking. He meant it. Torak wasn't sure how to respond. He was used to being in charge, to commanding armies, and leading warriors into battle. He had never been told that he was just one of many. This was going to be more difficult than he thought. Over the next few days, Torak went through the standard Marine training routines. They were brutal. Push-ups, sit-ups, running, carrying heavy loads, and enduring harsh conditions. Torak, with his immense strength, had no problem with the physical demands. He could lift weights that would crush normal men, and he could run for hours without tiring. But it wasn't just the physical challenges that the Marines threw at him. It was the mental ones. Every day, he was tested on his ability to follow orders, to work as part of a team, and to endure punishment without breaking. At first, Torak scoffed at the training. He thought it was beneath him. He had faced entire armies alone and emerged victorious. What could these humans teach him? But as the days passed, Torek began to notice something. The Marines didn't break. No matter how hard the training got, no matter how much they were pushed, they never gave up. They kept going, kept fighting, kept moving forward. And they did it together. One day, during an especially grueling exercise, Torek found himself struggling. The task was simple. He had to carry a heavy load across a long distance. He was used to carrying much heavier things, but the terrain was difficult, and the heat was intense. Torek was exhausted, and for the first time, he began to feel doubt. As he stumbled through the exercise, he noticed the other Marines. They were tired too, but they kept going. They encouraged each other, worked together, and helped one another when one of them faltered. Torek, still struggling, looked at a young Marine named Sergeant Harris. Harris was smaller than most of the other soldiers, but there was a fire in his eyes. He wasn't the strongest, but he had the heart of a warrior. As Torek watched him, he realized that the true strength of the Marines wasn't just in their physical abilities. It was in their unity, their determination, and their willingness to support each other no matter what. This realization shook Torek to his core. He had always believed that strength was measured by power alone. He had thought that the strongest warrior was the one who could defeat anyone in a fight. But the Marines had something different. They had a strength that came from within, a strength that was not about how much they could lift or how fast they could run, but how much they could endure and how far they were willing to go for each other. Torek knew then that he had much to learn. The next few days were harder than ever. He pushed himself harder, trying to match the Marines' endurance and determination. But it wasn't just about physical strength anymore. It was about mental toughness, about the will to keep going even when everything seemed impossible. The more he trained, the more he understood that there was a depth to human strength that he had never seen before. As the days turned into weeks, Torek began to change. His arrogance began to fade. He stopped seeing himself as superior to the Marines and started seeing them as equals. He learned to work with them, to rely on them, and to trust them. And in return, the Marines began to respect him, not because of his strength or his reputation, but because he had earned it through hard work and humility. Torek's training was far from over, but he had already begun to realize that this was the challenge he had been searching for. It wasn't about defeating enemies or conquering worlds. It was about understanding true strength, the kind that comes from within, the kind that comes from working together as a team. And as Torek looked around at the Marines, he knew that he had found something more valuable than anything he had ever fought for in the past. He had found the true meaning of being a warrior. This sets up a strong foundation for Torek's transformation, with a focus on internal conflict and personal growth, keeping the story both engaging and suspenseful. Torek woke up early the next morning to the sound of blaring horns and the sharp commands of officers. The sun had barely risen over the Earth's horizon, casting a soft glow on the base where the Marines trained. It was time for another day of grueling exercises, and Torek was ready, or at least he thought he was. He had already completed several days of the most intense training he had ever experienced, but there was something different about this morning. The Marines weren't just running drills or practicing combat techniques. They were preparing for something that would truly test their resolve. And Torek had a feeling it wasn't just going to be another day of physical exertion. Captain Mason approached him as he finished his morning stretch. "You're looking a little too confident, Torek," the captain remarked with a smirk. "Today's not going to be as easy as you think." Torek stood tall, his massive frame towering over the captain. "I don't need rest," he said simply, his voice deep and commanding. "This is nothing I haven't faced before." Captain Mason's smirk turned into a smile. "We'll see about that. The mission today is about mental strength, not just your physical power. The goal isn't to outlift or outrun anyone. It's to survive. You've got to think on your feet, adapt to the environment, and use your head. Most of all, you have to trust your team. I'm not sure if that's something you've gotten used to yet." Torak's pride flared up at the challenge. He had always been a lone warrior, relying on himself to survive in battles. But something in Captain Mason's voice made him question whether he had truly mastered the art of warfare. Was he really as invincible as he thought? Or was there something more he could learn here? The training exercise began with a simple task. Each group of Marines, including Torak, was given a simulated mission. They would be dropped into a hostile environment, surrounded by enemy forces. Their goal was to find and extract a high-value target and return to base safely. In reality, it would be impossible for anyone to do this without teamwork, but Torak didn't see it that way. To him, it was just another challenge to overcome, another enemy to defeat. As the exercise started, Torak's team was dropped into the thick woods, their footsteps muffled by the underbrush. The environment was difficult. Dense trees, rocky hills, and unpredictable weather. But Torak didn't care. He took charge, ordering the others to follow him as he stomped through the terrain, his eyes scanning for the target. The Marines followed his lead, but there was hesitation in their movements, as though they weren't sure whether they should trust his commands. For the first few hours, Torak led the way, cutting through the trees with ease, crushing rocks beneath his feet. But as they continued, the terrain grew more difficult. The weather turned, and a heavy rain began to pour down, soaking everyone to the bone. The path forward became treacherous, with deep mud and slippery rocks. Torak, however, was undeterred. He powered through, ignoring the cold, the rain, and the increasing difficulty of the path. His body was built for this, and he didn't need the Marines to keep up with him. He was the best, and he knew it. But as they trudged on, Torak noticed something strange. The Marines were falling behind. Slowly at first, but then more quickly. They were slipping in the mud, their energy fading. Torak's irritation grew. Why couldn't they keep up? He had no problem with the terrain. So why were they struggling? Didn't they understand how important it was to keep moving? "Keep up," he shouted, turning back to see them lagging. Sergeant Harris was the closest to him, struggling to climb a steep hill. His clothes were soaked, his boots heavy with mud, and he looked exhausted. "We're trying, Torak," Harris gasped, his voice strained. It's a lot harder than it looks." Torak didn't respond. He was frustrated, annoyed. He wanted to finish this mission, to prove that he was stronger, faster, and better than the Marines. He didn't care about their struggles. He had his eyes set on the target, and that was all that mattered. But as they continued, something shifted inside him. He noticed that the Marines weren't complaining. They weren't giving up. They kept pushing, even when they were exhausted. They helped each other up when someone fell behind, and they encouraged one another when the path seemed impossible. Torak's gaze turned back to Sergeant Harris, who was now helping one of the other Marines. Harris, though struggling, was keeping a cool head. He wasn't panicking. He was working with the team. And something in Torak's mind clicked. The Marines weren't just following orders. They were part of a family, a unit. They cared about each other's well-being, and they weren't going to leave anyone behind. For the first time since arriving on Earth, Torak began to understand the Marines' true strength. It wasn't their physical abilities that made them tough. It was their bond with each other. They didn't just survive for themselves. They survived for their brothers and sisters in arms. At that moment, Torak realized something important. If he wanted to succeed, if he wanted to become better, he would have to stop thinking like a lone wolf. He would have to start thinking like a Marine. The rest of the mission was a test of patience and trust. Torak learned to slow down, to listen, and to support the Marines when they struggled. He stopped charging ahead alone and started working with the team. And as they approached their target, Torak's respect for his fellow Marines grew. They had faced the hardest conditions together, and they had survived because they relied on each other. When the mission was over and they returned to base, Torak was exhausted but fulfilled. He had faced an entirely new challenge, one that had forced him to confront his own weaknesses and learned something he had never expected. The Marines had shown him that strength was not just about the power of one. It was about the power of many working together. As Torek stood in the rain, wiping mud from his face, Captain Mason approached him. "Not bad for a first-timer," the captain said with a grin. "You've got a long way to go, but you're starting to understand what it takes to be a Marine. Keep it up, and maybe you'll start thinking like one too." Torek nodded. There was still much for him to learn, but one thing was clear. The Marines had shown him a new way to fight. And now, for the first time in his life, Torek understood what true strength really was. It was not the power to crush your enemies. It was the power to rise together, to face any challenge, and to never give up, no matter what. Torek woke up with a sense of determination that had been missing before. The morning was still, but the air was thick with the weight of the day ahead. He had learned many lessons during his time with the Marines, but there was still so much more to understand. His body, though still strong, had started to feel the wear and tear of the training. His muscles were sore, and his mind was tired. But despite the exhaustion, something inside him had changed. He now knew that this wasn't just about physical strength. The challenges were pushing him to grow in ways he hadn't expected. He had always thought of himself as the ultimate warrior, the one who could defeat any opponent in battle with sheer force. But the Marines had taught him something more. Strength wasn't just about muscles and power. It was about resilience, discipline, and trust. And now, as he prepared for another day of training, he could feel that understanding deepening inside him. The day's exercise was different from the others. Captain Mason had informed him that today they would face a live-fire exercise. Torek had faced countless real battles, so the concept of live ammunition didn't bother him. What did concern him was the nature of the mission. They would have to work as a team, navigating a series of obstacles and engaging in simulated combat, all while under fire. There would be no room for mistakes. The goal was to see how well they could function together when the pressure was on. And once again, Torek was reminded of how different this was from anything he had experienced before. In past battles, he had been the one to lead and direct, charging into enemy lines alone. But now he had to rely on others, and it scared him more than he wanted to admit. The exercise began, and Torek's team moved swiftly through the forest. Their objective was to retrieve a critical piece of equipment hidden in a secured location. As soon as they entered the designated area, gunfire erupted from the simulated enemy positions. Torek's instincts kicked in immediately. He ducked behind cover, drawing his weapon and scanning the area for threats. The sound of bullets flying through the air reminded him of the chaos of real combat, but this time he was not alone. The Marines around him were also taking cover, coordinating their movements, and providing support where needed. For the first time since he arrived on Earth, Torek didn't feel like the strongest one in the field. He wasn't charging forward, taking out enemies single-handedly. Instead, he was moving with the team, following the commands of Sergeant Harris, who was leading them through the chaos. It was strange to him. He had always believed that he was the one who should be in control, who should be the one to lead the charge. But here, with the Marines, he had to trust others to take charge when needed, and he had to follow their orders when they directed him. Torek's frustration began to bubble up again. He was used to being in control, to calling the shots. Why should he follow orders from someone else? Why couldn't he just charge ahead and end this mission quickly? But as they moved deeper into enemy territory, Torek saw something that made him pause. Sergeant Harris had spotted an enemy position ahead. The young Marine immediately crouched low, signaling for the others to do the same. He moved with precision, coordinating his team to take cover and prepare for an assault. Torek watched him closely, realizing how calm and collected Harris was under pressure. He wasn't panicking, nor was he hesitating. He was thinking clearly, directing his team with confidence. It was then that Torek understood. The Marines didn't just fight with their bodies. They fought with their minds. They didn't charge into battle without thinking of the consequences. They worked together, each person doing their part for the success of the mission. And Harris, despite his youth, had become a leader in his own right. Torak had always relied on his raw strength to get him through battles, but the Marines had something he had never fully appreciated: strategy, cooperation, and the power of thinking ahead. As the exercise progressed, Torak began to adapt. He followed Harris's lead, working with the team to outmaneuver the enemy positions. The Marines communicated through hand signals, moving quickly and efficiently as they secured the area. Torak wasn't the one taking the lead anymore. He was learning to follow, learning to trust his team, and follow the guidance of those around him. It was a humbling experience, one that forced him to acknowledge his weaknesses. For the first time in his life, Torak was not the one in charge, and that reality stung. But it was also the moment when he realized that this was what he needed to learn. Leadership wasn't just about strength and power. It was about trust, collaboration, and understanding when to step back and let others take the reins. By the time they reached their objective and completed the mission, Torak was mentally exhausted. His body was sore from the day's activities, but his mind was overwhelmed by the sheer amount of new information he had processed. The Marines had done what they had always done, worked together to overcome the odds. And Torak had learned, for the first time, what it meant to be part of something larger than himself. The victory was not his alone. It was a shared success, earned through teamwork, communication, and trust. As they made their way back to base, Torak found himself walking alongside Sergeant Harris. He didn't say anything at first, but after a few moments, he spoke. "You're good," Torak said, his voice softer than usual. "You know how to lead." Harris smiled, a small, humble grin. "I'm just doing my job, sir. But thanks. We all lead in our own way, right?" Torak thought about that for a moment. He had always seen leadership as something that only the strongest could achieve, something that came from the ability to dominate others. But now he saw it differently. Leadership wasn't about dominance. It was about the ability to guide, to support, and to bring out the best in others. It was about knowing when to take charge and when to step back. And in that moment, Torak realized that the Marines had shown him a new way to lead, one that wasn't about strength alone, but about understanding and teamwork. When they reached the base, Captain Mason was waiting for them. He had been watching the entire exercise, his eyes scanning each member of the team. "Good job, everyone," the captain said, his voice approving. "Torak, you've come a long way. I can see it. You've learned something today, and I think you're starting to understand what it means to be part of a team." Torak nodded, his thoughts still racing. There was so much more to learn, so much more to understand. But one thing was clear. He had taken another step on his journey to becoming more than just the toughest warrior in the galaxy. He was learning to be something else, something greater. As the sun began to set over the base, Torak looked out at the horizon, his mind filled with new possibilities. For the first time in years, he felt like he was on the right path. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he was beginning to understand that true strength came from within, and that the greatest warriors were those who could learn and adapt. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for the team. And as he prepared for the challenges that lay ahead, Torak knew that the journey was far from over. The road to becoming a true Marine, a true warrior, had only just begun. The next day, Torak's mind was still buzzing with the lessons from the previous exercise. He could feel something shifting within him, but it wasn't easy to shake off the old habits that had defined him for so long. His pride, his need for control, it was all still there, lurking beneath the surface. Yet, something about the way the Marines worked together, the way they handled stress and chaos, had begun to make more sense. He wasn't sure if he was fully ready to embrace it, but he was starting to understand the value of relying on others. Today's exercise would be a different kind of challenge. Captain Mason had promised that it would test their physical endurance, mental agility, and ability to perform under pressure. The entire group would be tasked with navigating an obstacle course designed to push them to their limits. It wasn't just a simple test of speed or strength. The course was rigged with traps, environmental hazards, and unexpected twists that would force the Marines to think on their feet. Torek wasn't particularly concerned about the physical demands. After all, he had always prided himself on being the strongest warrior in the galaxy. But something told him that today's challenge would require more than just brute strength. When they arrived at the course, Torek immediately sized up the obstacles. The first section was a high wall, difficult to climb without help. The second was a pit of quicksand, followed by a maze of sharp rocks. There were simulated explosives hidden in certain areas, and each Marine would need to work together to disarm them. The final stretch involved crossing a raging river using nothing but a rope bridge, with the threat of being swept away if they weren't careful. The course seemed simple enough at first glance, but as Captain Mason briefed them on the rules, Torek felt a sense of tension creeping in. "This isn't just about getting through the obstacles," the captain said, his voice firm. "It's about working as a unit. Every Marine is responsible for helping the others. You can't leave anyone behind, no matter how tough it gets. If one of you fails, you all fail." "Got it." Torek's chest tightened at the captain's words. He wasn't sure he could get used to the idea of relying on others, of being part of something that was so dependent on the cooperation of everyone involved. In previous battles, he had never worried about leaving anyone behind. He was a lone wolf, and he trusted only himself. But here, with the Marines, things were different. They had a bond that Torek was still trying to comprehend. The exercise began, and Torek's instincts kicked in. The first obstacle was a high wall that required the Marines to work together to climb it. Sergeant Harris and a few others immediately started forming the human pyramid, helping one another up. Torek stood there for a moment, uncertain of what to do. His first impulse was to simply scale the wall alone. After all, he could do it faster, without relying on anyone. But as he saw the Marines working together, he remembered what Captain Mason had said about teamwork. Reluctantly, Torek approached the wall, offering his hand to help lift one of the others up. It wasn't easy. His pride fought against him, reminding him that he was strong enough to do this alone. But as the Marines lifted each other up, Torek slowly started to realize that this was the only way to succeed. One by one, the team made it over the wall. When it was Torek's turn, he realized that it would have been impossible without their help. They worked together, and it felt different. It felt right. The next obstacle was the quicksand. It was more dangerous than Torek had initially thought. He'd seen quicksand before in other environments, but this felt different. It was trickier, and the more they struggled, the faster they began to sink. As one of the Marines slipped and started to sink deeper, Torek acted without thinking. He dove into the quicksand, grabbing the Marine by the arm and pulling him back to safety. "You have to be careful," Sergeant Harris warned, pulling Torek back once they had both made it out of the quicksand. "You can't let the situation overwhelm you. It's about balance, working together, and staying calm under pressure." Torek nodded, his mind still racing from the close call. He hadn't expected the quicksand to be so treacherous, but it had served as a reminder. This wasn't just about his strength. It was about being strategic, thinking through every movement, and understanding that every choice had consequences. The third obstacle was the sharp rocks, which made the Marines slow down as they carefully navigated their way across. It was a test of patience and precision, and Torek found himself frustrated by the slower pace. He wanted to charge through, to just get it over with, but he understood the importance of taking his time. One wrong move could lead to injury, and Torek wasn't willing to risk that. As they made their way through the rocks, Captain Mason's voice came over their comms. "Focus, Marines. We're almost there. Keep your eyes on the goal, but don't forget the little things. One mistake could cost you everything." The final obstacle was the rope bridge over the river. The raging water below was a constant reminder of how dangerous this task could be. The Marines had to cross one at a time, relying on each other to maintain balance and keep the rope steady. Torak watched as the others crossed, their movements measured and careful. It wasn't a race. It was about working together, supporting each other when things got tough. When it was Torak's turn, he stepped onto the rope bridge, the rushing water beneath him sending a chill through his body. His first instinct was to rush across, to just make it to the other side as quickly as possible. But he remembered the lessons he had learned. He slowed his pace, focusing on his balance, on the movement of the others. Each Marine ahead of him helped guide him across, offering words of encouragement and steadying the bridge when it wobbled. By the time Torak made it to the other side, he realized something profound. He had crossed not just the river, but the line between being a lone warrior and being part of something greater. As they completed the course and gathered at the finish line, Torak stood silently, his chest heaving from exertion. He had learned more in this one exercise than he had in weeks of training. This was more than just physical strength. It was about strategy, patience, and trust. It was about understanding that sometimes the strongest warriors were not the ones who fought alone, but the ones who fought with others. Captain Mason approached them, his face serious but proud. "You did well, all of you. But remember, this is just one exercise. The real test comes when you face an enemy that doesn't play by the rules, an enemy that will try to break your spirit. But if you can trust each other, you will be unstoppable." Torak's mind was racing with everything he had learned. The strength of the team, the power of cooperation, and the importance of trust. These were the things that would make him stronger, not just as a warrior, but as a Marine. As they walked back to base, Torak felt a sense of quiet pride. He hadn't completed the course alone, but that was okay. In fact, it was more than okay. It was the first step toward understanding the true meaning of strength, and he was ready for the challenges that lay ahead, knowing that he no longer had to face them alone. The days continued to blend together for Torak as the grueling training with the Marines stretched on. Each exercise felt harder than the last, pushing his physical limits and challenging his mind in ways he had never experienced before. Yet despite the exhaustion and the intense demands of the drills, Torak had started to see progress in himself. He was becoming more than just the toughest warrior in the galaxy. He was learning to be something different, a true soldier, a true Marine. The latest mission was unlike any they had faced so far. The Marines had received intelligence about a group of hostile mercenaries hiding in a dense forest. Their objective was simple: infiltrate, neutralize the threat, and secure the area. It sounded like a standard operation, but Torak could sense the tension in the air. Captain Mason had warned them that this mission would be dangerous. The mercenaries were well-armed, well-trained, and willing to fight to the death to protect their hideout. The team gathered early that morning, and Torak could see the familiar look of determination in the eyes of every Marine. But this time, there was something different in their demeanor. They weren't just prepared for battle, they were prepared to work together, to rely on each other in ways that went beyond the physical. This was a test of everything they had learned so far, and it would require every Marine to perform at their best, not as individuals, but as a unit. As they made their way toward the forest, Torak couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. When he had first arrived on Earth, he had been alone in his mind, convinced that he could handle anything on his own. But now, he was part of something much bigger. He had learned the value of patience, discipline, and trust. He had learned that leadership wasn't about dominating others. It was about guiding and supporting those around you. And he had learned the hard way that true strength came from working together. The forest was thick with trees, the air heavy with humidity and the scent of moss. As they moved cautiously through the underbrush, Torak could hear the soft crunch of footsteps behind him, the occasional rustle of leaves as one of the Marines shifted into position. They were moving in perfect formation, communicating with hand signals and subtle gestures. There was no need for words. Everyone knew their role, and everyone was prepared to act at a moment's notice. The first sign of danger came when the team approached a clearing. Captain Mason signaled for them to stop, and they all dropped to the ground, scanning the area. Torek's sharp eyes locked onto a figure in the distance, the lone mercenary, standing guard. The Marine team moved quickly into position, silently crawling through the tall grass. They needed to neutralize the guard without alerting the others. Torek felt a surge of adrenaline in his veins as he crouched low, waiting for the signal. Sergeant Harris was the first to move, gliding forward like a shadow. He was quick and efficient, taking down the mercenary with a swift, precise strike. The team moved in unison, clearing the area in silence. It was a perfect execution of the strategy they had learned, and Torek couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in how smoothly the operation had gone. They were no longer just a group of soldiers. They were a well-oiled machine, each member working together to accomplish a common goal. But the mission was far from over. As they advanced deeper into the forest, the atmosphere became tense. The mercenaries knew they were coming, and Torek could feel the anticipation building. The next few hours would be a test of everything they had learned, and as they neared the mercenary hideout, Torek felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. He was no longer the lone warrior he had been when he first arrived on Earth. He was part of this team, and that thought gave him strength. When they reached the mercenary hideout, the battle erupted with the ferocity of a storm. Gunfire rang out, the sound of bullets zipping through the air, the crackle of explosions in the distance. Torek's instincts kicked in immediately. He ducked behind cover, his weapon at the ready, scanning for targets. The mercenaries were well positioned, using the terrain to their advantage, but the Marines were relentless. They fought as one unit, moving with precision, communicating effortlessly under fire. Torek moved through the chaos, his mind sharp despite the confusion of battle. He wasn't charging in alone like he would have in the past. He was moving with the team, covering their backs, providing support when needed. Sergeant Harris was nearby, directing the others, his voice steady and calm amidst the madness. Captain Mason's presence was a constant, guiding them through the onslaught. Every Marine was doing their part, each of them playing a vital role in the success of the mission. In the midst of the battle, Torek saw something that made him stop in his tracks. A young Marine, barely out of his teens, had taken a hit. He was lying on the ground, bleeding, unable to move. Without thinking, Torek rushed toward him, ignoring the danger of exposing himself. He knelt beside the Marine, pulling him into a safer position behind cover. The kid was conscious, but he was in pain, struggling to breathe. Torek could see the fear in his eyes, the terror of being injured in the middle of a fight. "Stay with me, Marine," Torek said, his voice calm but firm. "We're getting you out of here." The Marine nodded weakly, his face pale. Torek could feel the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. This wasn't just about fighting the enemy. It was about protecting the people he had come to trust, the people who had become his team. In that moment, Torek realized something profound. He wasn't just fighting for victory anymore. He was fighting for them, for the Marines who had become more than comrades. They had become his family. As the battle raged on, Torek helped the wounded Marine to safety, using all the training he had received to protect him from further harm. The fight eventually ended with the mercenaries defeated, their hideout secured. The Marines had completed their mission, but the cost was high. Several were injured, and one had fallen. The loss of a teammate weighed heavily on everyone, and there was a quiet sadness in the air as they gathered to assess the situation. Captain Mason approached Torek as the team regrouped. "You did good out there," he said, his voice filled with quiet pride. "You've come a long way since you first arrived. You're no longer just the toughest warrior in the galaxy. You're a Marine, Torek. You've earned that title." Torek nodded, his chest swelling with a mixture of pride and humility. He had learned more in the past few weeks than he could have ever imagined. He had learned the true meaning of strength, of leadership, and of trust. And as the sun began to set over the battlefield, Torek knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be filled with more challenges, more battles to face. But now, he was ready. He wasn't alone anymore. He was part of something bigger, a team, a family. And that made all the difference.